It doesn't go up. That's the thing nobody put in the briefing. The smoke. It doesn't go up. It pools. It finds the corners first. And it starts to remember. The files aren't paper. They were never paper. His name was Elias Craw, 53 years old, retired federal archivist, widower. 30 years of patient custodial work, locating documents, processing them, disposing of them. The quiet administrative machinery of a government that generates more paper than it ever destroys. He had never been promoted, never been asked to testify, never assigned anything that couldn't be described in 3 words. Locate, process, dispose. The letter came on a Tuesday. Cream-colored envelope, no return address. The paper inside smelled of something old. Not quite mildew, not quite copper. Something that predated both. It told him his clearance had been retroactively elevated to Tier 7, custodial provisional. It told him the assignment was voluntary, but used language that made voluntary feel like a formality typed in out of legal habit. He was to report to a decommissioned ranger station near a ridge the locals called the Whispering Notch. He was to bring nothing personal. The work was simple. Locate, process, dispose. He drove 11 hours through country that got narrower and quieter with every mile, until the road stopped appearing on any map produced after 1971. He arrived at dusk. The ranger station was a concrete shell. The letter included a flat black key that opened a side door, which opened onto a staircase. Only down. 43 steps. He counted them. He would count them every day after that. The counting felt important, though he couldn't have said why. At the bottom, a stenciled door read, Sector 4, Records, Disposition, Authorized Personnel. Beneath it, in pencil, in handwriting that was very small and very careful, someone had added, Don't read them. He assumed it was a joke. He opened the door. The smell reached him before the light did. Ozone, old copper, and beneath those, something organic, not rot, something closer to a living thing kept too long in a sealed space. The way a greenhouse smells when ventilation fails. Warm and pressurized, almost breathing. He found the light switch. Fluorescent tubes flickered on one by one, revealing a long, low-ceilinged room, lead-lined, concrete-floored, sealed with something that gave the floor a faint, dark sheen. as though it had been lacquered with years of accumulated humidity. Along the left wall, the furnace, larger than he'd expected, industrial grade, government issue, 50s manufacture, cast iron door with a circular handle like a ship's wheel. Around its base, the concrete was stained in a wide, irregular ring. Not soot exactly, something denser, something that had dried where it settled rather than rising with the heat. He noted that, filed it away. The room had a quality he couldn't attribute to any single feature. A weight in the air, a pressure just below the threshold of discomfort, the kind of atmospheric density you find at the bottom of very deep water, or inside a room that has been sealed for a very long time. His ears did not pop. His breathing did not labor. But his body registered something, in the way a body registers the presence of something large and still in a dark place before the mind has formed the thought. He stood in it for a moment. Then he moved. Along the right wall, 14 crates, wooden frames wrapped in waxed oilcloth, each stenciled with a lot number and a designation he didn't recognize. Dry records, organic substrate, lot. Every year range was blacked out. Every origin designation was blacked out. On the workbench beside the furnace sat a laminated instruction sheet. He read it under the fluorescent light. Open each lot in sequence. Transfer contents to the furnace using the provided implement. Do not read. Do not photograph. Do not attempt to identify subjects. Ensure complete combustion before proceeding to the next lot. When smoke begins to pool rather than rise, terminate the session. Seal the furnace door and wait. Resume after a minimum of 4 hours. He read that last line twice. When smoke begins to pool rather than rise. He set the sheet down. He looked at the dark ring staining the floor around the furnace base. He told himself, ventilation problem. The exhaust fan undersized. The smoke backed up. He told himself that while he got the furnace going, feeding it scraps of brown paper until the fire found its pace. A deep, rhythmic whomp, 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 like something large and patient breathing. He stood in front of it and let the heat press against his face. This is just work. Locate, process, dispose. He opened lot 1. The oilcloth was stiff but not brittle. He scored the wax seal with a penknife. The smell that emerged was dry and faintly warm, the way an old leather Bible smells when opened after years. Inside, the records were stacked flat, separated by tissue paper. He lifted the first one and held it under the work light. It was not paper. The knowledge arrived the way inconvenient truths arrive, not as a shock, but as a slow, unwilling acknowledgement of something already true before the mind was ready to admit it. The substrate was thin, translucent at the edges, pale, the color of old cream or the underside of a wrist. Its surface had a faint topographic quality, a slight irregularity that suggested the record had once been alive in a way that paper never is. The markings were dense and small, applied in brownish ink. Names, dates, grid coordinates, hand-drawn lines connecting names to coordinates in ways that followed no geographic logic. The lines moved like roads, or rivers, or something else entirely. Some of the names had been redacted, not with the clean black bars of a government stamp, but with the same brownish ink applied in dense, layered strokes, as though whoever had made the redaction had been pressing down hard, pressing down the way you press on a wound. There were numbers in the margins that he didn't recognize as dates. There were symbols he didn't recognize as anything. In the lower right corner of the first record, very small, was a word that had not been redacted. A single word, written in a different hand than the rest, lighter, less deliberate, as though added quickly and without authorization. He did not read it. He folded his attention away from it the way you fold away the corner of a page you don't intend to return to. He called them skin maps later in the audio log. At the time, he called them unusual. He set the record on the shovel, walked to the furnace, opened the iron door. The heat hit him like a wall. He pushed the shovel in. The record curled, not quickly, not the way paper curls in a fast, eager panic, but slowly, deliberately, the edges drawing inward like fingers closing around something. And as it contracted, it seemed for a fraction of a second to resist. He noted that, filed it away. He closed the furnace door. He went back to the crate. The work settled into rhythm. This is what he focused on. Lift, carry, open, slide, wait, close. Lift, carry, open, slide, wait, close. The furnace was constant behind him. The fluorescents hummed their single endless note. The concrete was solid under his boots. He did not look closely at the markings. He was glad to comply with the instruction not to read. He cracked the furnace door to check the combustion. The record was burning, but the smoke was wrong. Normal smoke rises. It finds the upward draft and goes. That is the nature of smoke. This smoke descended. It emerged in slow threads, the color of black amber. the color of ancient tree resin. It coiled above the grate and then fell, pooling on the furnace floor in a slow, viscous layer, like something that understood gravity and was choosing deliberately to follow it. He watched it. He closed the furnace door. He looked at the dark ring on the concrete around the furnace base. He understood what had made it. He stood still for 3 minutes. He watched the clock's second hand make 3 full revolutions, and he focused on that, the ordinary mechanical sweep of it, because the alternative was to focus on something that was not ordinary and not mechanical. Then he went back to work. The instructions had accounted for this. Someone had stood here before him, had seen this, and had survived long enough to write the protocol down. He found that comforting, in the specific and limited way that evidence of prior survival is comforting. He opened the furnace to add the next record. The smoke had pooled to the door's base and was seeping out in a slow, deliberate thread, feeling across the sealed concrete like something exploring with a single, curious finger. It was not shapeless. It had preferences. It filled the low places first. It moved with a consideration that he could not explain and chose not to examine. He heard it on the 4th record of Lot 3. Not words, a texture in the burning sound, something beneath the furnace roar, below the metallic tick of cooling iron, occupying the frequency between sound and feeling. He opened the furnace door and leaned in despite himself, because that is the particular cruelty of whispers. They require you to move toward them. The record was burning, curling inward, and as it contracted, as the markings blackened and the edges drew to center, the sound clarified. The record was saying its own name. He understood this without wanting to. The whisper had no clear syllables he could write down, but it carried the particular weight and shape of an identity, the sound a person makes in sleep when dreaming of themselves. He closed the furnace door. He stepped back. The smoke on the floor had reached the workbench. In the far corner, the accumulated vapor had begun to suggest a shape. Nothing defined, nothing he could point to and name, just a density, an organization, a center from which the smoke distributed itself with a kind of direction that random dispersion does not have. He thought of the names on the records, the names beneath the redactions. He put the next record in. In the corner, the shape had grown slightly more specific. It had a vertical axis, something like a head, something like shoulders. It did not move. It simply was, with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time for a fire to bring it back. He became aware, standing there, that there was a second shape forming, not in the same corner, along the base of the crates, where the smoke had pooled deepest, where the oilcloth draped low and the shadows were thickest. A different density, a different center, smaller, or perhaps only further away, in the way that perspective makes things seem small when they are simply at a distance. He did not count the shapes. He felt with some certainty that counting them would be a mistake, that counting them would mean he had accepted they were there, and that acceptance was a door he was not yet prepared to walk through. He kept his eyes on the furnace, on the iron door, on the circular handle like a ship's wheel, on the ordinary mechanical fact of it. The ventilation grate was in the ceiling, centered above the furnace. He had assumed it was exhaust ventilation. He noticed now that the louvers were angled the wrong way, not outward, designed to direct air into the room, designed specifically to allow a view from above. He stared at it. He raised one hand slowly, in a gesture that was not quite a wave. Nothing happened, but he kept his eyes on it a moment longer than necessary, and in that moment he understood something the cream-colored letter had not mentioned. He was not here to burn the records because the records were dangerous. He was here because someone needed to know what happened when they burned. He was not the archivist. He was the experiment. The thought arrived without drama. It settled into him the way cold settles into a room, not all at once, but pervasively, finding every corner. He set down the shovel. He stood in the center of the room. The smoke covered a third of the floor. It moved in slow, unhurried currents. In the far corner, the shape was more specific than before, and he understood, standing there, what the records actually were. They were not documentation of people. They were the people. Whatever the government had done, in the years whose dates were all redacted, in the place whose name was blacked out on every crate, whatever had been collected and pressed and dried and wrapped in oilcloth and stored in a lead-lined room beneath a mountain, these were not records about the subjects. These were the subjects, reduced, compressed, held in the only way they could still be held. And when you burned them, you did not destroy them. You released them. He set the shovel parallel to the workbench. He removed the welding gloves and folded them on top of it. He walked to the staircase door, and he put his hand on the handle, and he paused. Behind him, the furnace breathed its low, patient heartbeat. Behind him the smoke moved in its slow currents, and from somewhere in the black amber pooling across the floor, from somewhere in the shapes accumulating in the corners, he heard something. Not with his ears, behind his sternum, the way you feel a door close in another part of a building, a vibration reaching you through the structure of things. One word: stay. He opened the door. He climbed 43 stairs. He counted every one. He pushed out into mountain night, cold, wide, full of ordinary darkness. He stood in the smell of pine and stone and listened to wind move through the ridge. He drove 11 miles before he stopped, engine running for the heat. He held his phone and pressed record and talked until the words ran out. The smoke doesn't go up. That's the thing nobody put in the briefing. He stopped recording. He sat with the engine running. After a while, the air inside the car began to smell of ozone and copper and something older than both. He looked in the rearview mirror. In the back seat, the dark was denser than it should have been. It had a shape. It had followed him. Up 43 stairs and 11 miles of mountain road, the way smoke follows a draft, the way a name follows the person who carries it, the way the dead follow the ones who were asked in cream-colored envelopes to burn them. He adjusted the mirror. He drove. The dark in the back seat shifted with the curves of the road, always finding its center, always settling, patient, amber black and quiet. At a gas station in the valley, a woman at the next pump looked at his car, looked away, then looked back. She moved her children to the far side of her vehicle without saying a word. He paid for the gas. He got back in the car. He sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The gas station's fluorescent canopy threw a flat white light across the windshield, and in that light, in the reflection, he could see himself, an unremarkable man of 53, tired-looking, still wearing the government-issue respirator around his neck like a talisman he hadn't thought to remove. He looked like what he was, a custodian, a man whose job was to tend to things other people didn't want to think about. He looked at the back seat in the mirror. The shape waited there, patient and amber black. He looked away. Somewhere on a 2-lane highway, mountains on both sides, no lights for 30 miles in any direction, he felt it again. Behind his sternum. One word. Stay. He turned up the radio. He drove east.